The auction hall reeked of sweat, dust, and old cruelty, the kind that soaked into the wooden beams and never left. Lanterns swung overhead, throwing harsh light across a raised platform where men were paraded like livestock. Laughter came easy here, cheap, sharp, and careless. When she was pushed forward, the noise grew louder, barefoot on the splintered boards. Dress torn and hanging loose, she kept her eyes on the floor. Looking up only invited judgment, and judgment always hurt more than silence. The auctioneer leaned on his gavel, grinning as if this were his favorite moment of the night. "Next lot," he announced, tugging her arm so the crowd could see her face. Straight from the red lantern, he paused for effect, enjoying the anticipation. And before anyone asks, yes, even they rejected her. The hall exploded with laughter. Someone whistled. Another man slapped his knee. Words like broken and useless were tossed around as casually as coins. One voice called out that she wasn't worth the rope that held her. Another said a brothel turning her away was proof enough of her value. Each word landed like a stone, piling on her chest, until breathing felt like work. The auctioneer tried to start the bidding, but no hands rose. He mocked the crowd, pretending to beg, though his eyes gleamed with cruelty. "Come now, gentlemen." Not even $1 for her. He laughed again when no one answered. She closed her eyes. She already knew what happened to girls no one bought. The cage, the hunger, the endless nights where hope was something you barely remembered how to spell. She felt smaller, with every second like she was fading in front of them. Then the laughter faltered. Heavy footsteps echoed from the back of the hall. The doors creaked open, letting in a slice of cold night air. A tall man stepped inside, dust on his coat, a sheriff's star catching the lantern light. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the auctioneer straightened. The man didn't rush. He walked with purpose, eyes fixed on the platform. When he reached her, he did the unthinkable. He took her hand. Not rough, not claiming, just firm enough to remind her she was real. "I'll buy," he said. The room fell silent, stunned by 3 simple words that changed everything. She thought she knew about her fate. The silence that followed his words felt heavier than all the laughter before it. The auctioneer stared at the sheriff as if he had misheard, then threw his head back and laughed loud enough to break the tension. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, still grinning. "You must be joking," he said. "A man like you? For her?" He gestured toward her as though she were a cracked chair no one wanted to sit on. The sheriff didn't answer right away. He kept hold of her hand, his thumb resting lightly against her knuckles, steady and calm. "Name the price," he said again, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Men leaned closer, curiosity replacing mockery. Some shook their heads, others sneered, offended that anyone would interrupt their entertainment. The auctioneer shrugged. "She's sickly, stubborn, and bad luck," he said. "Brothel couldn't break her, couldn't use her. You're throwing money away." "Then it won't be much," the sheriff replied. A price was called out, low, insulting, barely worth mentioning. Without hesitation, the sheriff reached into his coat and laid the money on the table. No bargaining, no second glance. The gavel struck sharp and final, echoing through the hall like a gunshot. Just like that, it was over. The chains around her wrists were unlocked, the metal falling away with a soft clink that made her flinch. She waited for instructions, for someone to shove her forward, but the sheriff simply guided her toward the exit. The men watched in stunned silence, some with anger, others with something uncomfortably close to shame. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. She sucked in a breath, dizzy from the sudden absence of noise and filth. The sheriff paused, then shrugged off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, smelling of leather and road dust, and it nearly made her knees buckle. "You got a name?" he asked, not looking at her. She hesitated. Names had always been used to summon her, to claim her, to remind her she was owned. "Lena," she said quietly, testing the sound as if it might break. "Well, Lena," he said, leading her toward his horse. "You're not going back there." Her heart pounded. She stared at his back, waiting for the condition, the price she hadn't been told about yet. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the wind. He mounted the horse and offered a hand to help her up. "Because I don't like men who laugh at misery," he said. And because some things are worth buying, even when no one else sees it. As they rode away from the auction hall, Lena realized she wasn't crying from fear anymore. She was crying because, for the first time, the road ahead wasn't already decided for her. The sheriff's house stood at the edge of town where the noise thinned and the air felt cleaner. A modest place with a low porch and a single lantern burning in the window. To Lena, it looked unreal, like something from a story meant for other people. She followed him inside, half expecting the walls to close in or hidden rules to reveal themselves. The moment the door shut, instead, he showed her a small room with a narrow bed, clean sheets, and a folded blanket laid neatly at the foot. A basin of warm water sat on a stool, steam still rising from it. He placed the lantern on the table and stepped back. "You can lock the door," he said. "No one comes in unless you say so." The words confused her more than kindness ever had. She waited for the unspoken demand, the look that would explain what he really wanted, but it never came. He left her there, closing the door gently behind him. Lena sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the quiet, her hands shaking as if the noise of the auction hall still echoed in her bones. Days passed slowly. The sheriff brought food and left it on the table without comment. Sometimes he nodded to her in passing. Sometimes he spoke about the weather or the work in town, as if she were an ordinary presence in his home. No one watched her. No one counted her steps. At night she slept with the door locked, then unlocked it again by morning, testing her own courage. The town noticed. Eyes followed her when she walked beside him to the market. Whispers curled through the streets like smoke. Some people looked curious, others disapproving, and a few openly hostile. Lena kept her head down, the old instinct hard to break. But the sheriff walked at an easy pace, unbothered, as though gossip were just another kind of weather. One evening after supper, she finally asked the question that had been clawing at her. "You didn't buy me to own me," she said, her voice tight. "So why did you buy me at all?" He studied her for a moment, then sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "I bought you time," he said. "Time to rest. Time to choose what comes next, without someone standing over you." "And if I leave?" she asked. "Then you leave," he answered simply. That answer frightened her more than chains ever had. Choice was heavy. Choice meant the future wasn't already written. Later, as she sat on the porch steps, watching the sheriff's old dog curl up at her feet like she belonged there, Lena realized something quiet but powerful was happening. For the first time in her life, she was not surviving one day at a time. She was beginning to imagine a tomorrow. Trouble did not announce itself at first. It crept in on whispers and sideways looks. Lena felt it in the way conversations stopped when she passed, in the tightening of shoulders, in the looks that lingered too long. The sheriff noticed too, though he said nothing. He had seen towns turn ugly before, when their sense of ownership was challenged. The men came at dusk. 3 of them stood near the fence, hats low, hands loose at their sides in a way that meant they were ready for violence. The smell of liquor carried across the yard. One laughed and called out that the sheriff thought he could buy respect along with a woman no one wanted. Another spat into the dirt and said she belonged to the town that she always had. Inside the house, Lena's chest tightened. The old fear surged back, sharp and familiar. Her legs wanted to run, to hide, to disappear the way she always had. She reached for the door, then stopped. For the first time, leaving felt like surrender, not escape. The sheriff stepped onto the porch, his voice calm but carrying. He told them to go home. They answered with insults, accusing him of playing hero, of thinking himself better than the rest. One of them lifted a gun just enough to make the threat clear. Lena stepped out beside the sheriff. The movement drew gasps and curses. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat. But she stood straight, forcing her shaking hands to still. "You laughed when they sold me," she said, her voice thin but steady. "You laughed because it was easy, because cruelty costs nothing." The men hesitated. Some shifted uncomfortably. The one with the gun lowered it a fraction. "She's not yours," the sheriff said quietly. She never was. Silence stretched until it hurt. Shame crept in where anger had been, and one by one the men backed away, muttering excuses that sounded hollow even to themselves. When they finally left, the night felt lighter, as if something ugly had been driven out along with them. Later, Lena sat on the porch steps, the boards cool beneath her palms. The sheriff handed her a cup of water and sat beside her, not too close. "You didn't just buy me time," she said after a while. He glanced at her. "No, you bought me back from the laughing," she said, "from being a thing people could throw away." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "And you bought yourself something too." She looked up at the stars, bright and countless. "What's that?" "A future," he said. In that quiet space between past and promise, Lena understood the truth at last. The sheriff had not bought a broken girl. He had bought a chance for her to choose, and for himself to stand on the right side of a world that had forgotten how.